On this Friday night, delicate and critical mission. The Canadian veterans helping Ukrainian women and children escape war.
We're here for the long haul.
As husbands and fathers stay behind to defend their country. The UN's new investigation into mass graves in Mariupol and Russia's shifting strategy as its offensive stalls. The federal boost of cash meant to relieve surgical backlogs. Why experts say this won't solve the problem. Plus, who betrayed Anne Frank and her family?
Sort of a disregard for historical fact and evidence.
Controversial claims in a Canadian author's new book.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jackson Prosco.
Hi there, and thanks for joining us. Russia may be walking back its military goals in Ukraine tonight as Vladimir Putin's invasion falters. Today, the Kremlin said it will now focus on seizing the eastern region of Donbass. That's where Russian-backed separatists have been fighting since 2014. The U.S. believes Russian troops are no longer advancing on the capital of Kyiv, and they may have lost full control of the city of Kherson. Tonight, U.S. President Joe Biden is in neighboring Poland, visiting U.S. troops and Ukrainian refugees. And in Ukraine, new details are emerging about the grim situation in Mariupol, where officials say hundreds of people were killed while hiding from Russian bombs. Crystal Goomansingh begins our coverage.
Rubble and confusion. These are some of the first images from inside a theater in Mariupol after a Russian missile strike March 16th. The basement was being used as a bomb shelter. The cell phone video shared widely as officials broke the grim news that roughly 300 people may have died in that building. There's barely anything left of Mariupol, the city cut off from life-saving supplies and basic necessities for weeks.
Основные задачи первого этапа операции выполнены.
Claiming the first stage of the so-called Russian operation has been generally accomplished, senior Russian defense official Sergei Radskoy said attention can now be turned to liberating the Donbass. That eastern region has seen ongoing fighting since 2014 after Russia first invaded and annexed Crimea. The Kremlin recognized the breakaway region as an independent state days before launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The area is also where some of Ukraine's most experienced combat soldiers are stationed. Still, the war and its devastating effects are being experienced across the country. Ukrainian officials share videos like this regularly showing that civilians are dying. This strike in Kharkiv killed 6. Near the capital city, more devastation and pain. You can see for yourself what happened here. People were killed. Peace negotiations continue but are described as very difficult. Ukraine's foreign minister says his country would not relinquish its demands, saying in a statement, "We insist first of all on a ceasefire, security guarantees, and territorial integrity of Ukraine." Ukraine's president, in yet another video message, told his people they are working to bringing peace closer, but also victory. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
As the fighting continues, the United Nations Human Rights Team says civilian deaths continue to climb, and now there's growing evidence of mass graves near the city of Mariupol, with some appearing to hold hundreds of bodies.
One mass grave we've been able to get satellite information on, and we estimate that one of those mass graves holds about 200 people. Since Russian armed forces launched their attacks on the 24th of February, at least 1,035 civilians have been killed and at least 1,650 injured.
Now, this all comes as the refugee situation in Ukraine hits another milestone. The UN says more than 10 million people have been forced to leave their homes. 6.5 million Ukrainians are now displaced within the country, and the rest have fled entirely. Today, U.S. President Joe Biden visited neighboring Poland, where he's set to come face to face with this once-in-a-generation crisis. Mike Armstrong reports from Poland.
It was another busy day at what has been, since the beginning of this crisis, one of the busiest border crossings. The steady flow of refugees from Ukraine into Poland continues. This refugee says Poland and other neighbors have helped, but what she hopes for most is the end of the war as soon as possible. Even a month in, Poland is still adding services. This refugee aid center in Warsaw goes online this weekend. It's a joint project with the Norwegian group.
We cannot do this on our own.
The help, Warsaw's mayor says, is vital. His city and the country are almost overwhelmed. Close to 2/3 of the refugees who've left Ukraine have left through Poland. The mayor says taking them in is one thing, keeping them is another.
We need a relocation scheme, of course a voluntary relocation scheme in Europe and in the world.
The U.S. president is in Poland. He's set to meet refugees Saturday. Friday, he was briefed by aid organizations. One of the things he discussed is how the war is going to affect food security, not just in Ukraine, but in other countries as well.
Bad news is they're in the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine and Russia. But we, the United States, are going to do our part because we're the third largest producer of wheat in the world. And our Canadian friends are going to do the same thing.
This week, the Biden administration announced it would provide more than $1 billion in humanitarian assistance and pledged to take in 100,000 refugees. Now, what is creating so many refugees are situations like this: devastation and death. The UN Human Rights Office admits it doesn't have a good idea of the number of dead. It will only say it's identified at least 1,035 civilians who've been killed.
I say at least because we do not yet have the full picture of locations that have seen intense fighting.
Now, as the number of refugees grows, so does hunger among those left behind. It estimates about 1 in 5 Ukrainians still in the country is now having trouble finding enough to eat. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Krakow, Poland.
And a little later in the newscast, we'll show you how Ukrainian families desperate to escape war were able to call on Canadian veterans for help. The invasion of Ukraine has hardened Europe's resolve to wean itself off Russian energy supplies to cut off a key source of income for the Kremlin. Today, the U.S. announced a plan to supply liquefied natural gas to the EU. Heather Yourex-West joins us now from Washington. And Heather, will this be enough for Europe to move away from Russian sources?
Jackson, the short answer is no. Europe just can't afford to do anything like that, even with the help being promised from the U.S. today. And that's because the numbers just don't add up. Europe brings in more than 150 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia each year. The U.S. is promising an additional 15 billion cubic meters. That's just 10% of what's needed. The U.S. isn't promising more because they can't deliver it. Canada can't either. There isn't the infrastructure in place because there hasn't been the investment needed, and this isn't something you can change on a dime.
These projects take billions of dollars and they take years to do, as Canada has experienced, takes sometimes a decade to do. So that it might help in the short term. It feels good, but it's not going to displace Russian gas.
25% of the Russian gas that we are getting is non-replaceable. We have either to continue to finance Putin's war, or we have to face recession.
So it sounds like Europe may have its hands tied in the short term, but could that change?
Well, Putin's actions have certainly put a plan in motion that will see Europe move away from Russian energy as quickly as they can. Germany released a report today that would see its Russian imports cut in half by midsummer, with the country completely off of Russian oil and gas by 2024. It is possible, but markets need certainty. They need commitments from customers that if they invest, they will see the return. Jackson?
Heather Yourex-West in Washington. Thanks, Heather. 3 more pediatric cancer patients from Ukraine have arrived in Toronto for treatment. The Hospital for Sick Children says they arrived with their families from Poland Wednesday. Dr. Sumit Gupta traveled with them and says they're settling in nicely.
I have to say the resilience of these children who, having had their lives completely disrupted, can still laugh at silly jokes or enjoy beating adults, i.e. myself, at card games is really quite awe-inspiring.
Sick Kids Hospital is now caring for 5 cancer patients from Ukraine. The federal government is promising to transfer $2 billion in top-up payments to the provinces and territories to help tackle surgery backlogs. The health minister says unprecedented pressures exacerbated by the pandemic are putting the health system at risk. But as Abigail Beeman reports, some say there are other, more effective ways to deal with the problem.
Look at my scar.
A happy and active 6-year-old now.
I feel better.
Jocelyn Ellison was living with constant pain and urinary tract infections due to kidney problems. A hold on so-called non-urgent surgeries due to pandemic backlogs meant she had to wait a year for the surgery she finally got in January.
It goes pee, but it don't hurt anymore.
Jocelyn is one of hundreds of thousands of Canadians forced to wait too long for procedures.
If she had her surgery sooner, it could have saved her a lot of suffering that she's been through. It could have saved her a lot of embarrassment at school.
We have some very important news.
Friday, Ottawa announced $2 billion for provinces and territories to address the surgical backlog.
This major investment could help provinces and territories clearing hundreds of thousands of backlog surgeries.
That's in addition to $4 billion promised a year ago, but short of the $6 billion the Liberals promised to invest, quote, immediately in the last campaign.
I think we are really just starting to understand the tip of the iceberg in terms of the impact of these backlogs and slowdowns.
Provinces have long been calling for permanent increases to health transfers to the tune of almost $30 billion, not top-ups, which aren't as effective at dealing with things like critical staffing shortages. Some experts dealing with the devastating impact of backlogs firsthand say unless you tackle root causes such as staffing and bed shortages, money won't solve the problem.
If you created an environment where people got sicker, people's illnesses were not being detected, and they were moving into the next stage of cancer or ALS or whatever else, are you really winning?
About those permanent health transfers, Friday, the health minister laid out a series of priorities which sound more like strings attached, something provinces have been very opposed to. Duclos says this list, including access to family doctors, addressing backlogs and staffing and long-term care, is a list of consensus. And still on the politics of healthcare, this week saw the new Liberal NDP deal. Friday, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh took credit for the Liberals' $2 billion top-up, saying New Democrats have started to deliver results. Jackson?
Abigail Beeman in Ottawa. Thanks, Abigail. The first made in Canada COVID-19 vaccine has been rejected by the World Health Organization. Quebec-based Medicago, which created the plant-derived vaccine, is partially owned by Philip Morris International, the largest tobacco company in the world. The WHO has a strict policy against engaging with companies that promote tobacco. It's why the organization has denied the vaccine's approval for emergency use. And without that, the federal government will not be able to donate doses of the shot to the COVAX Vaccine Sharing Alliance. Health Canada has approved the vaccine's use for people aged 18 to 64. Plastic inside our bodies. Coming up, how much we could be ingesting and the health concerns that raises. Plus, Canada's goal to win the World Cup qualifier. Canada's men's soccer team will have to wait a few more days to make their World Cup dreams a reality after a tough loss to Costa Rica last night. The game, which included a controversial red card, ended 1-0 for the home team. Canada's next chance to clinch a spot in the 2022 Qatar World Cup will be on Sunday when they play Jamaica in Toronto. A sobering discovery by researchers in the Netherlands. They've detected microplastics in human blood for the first time. The peer-reviewed study found certain microplastics in nearly 80% of the 22 people tested. Half of the samples contained PET plastic, commonly used to make drink bottles. The research is considered a breakthrough despite the small sample size.
We still have to understand where these particles, what happens to these particles in our body. And do they travel to certain organs? Do they accumulate there? Are they eliminated via the bile or the kidney?
More work is being done to understand the damage microplastics may cause to human cells and immune systems. It's believed humans could be ingesting a credit card's worth of plastic each and every week. An ice shelf about twice the size of Toronto has collapsed in Antarctica. Days of unusually warm weather caused the Conger ice shelf to collapse last week. Temperatures had soared to more than 20 degrees above normal. Ice shelves play a critical role in keeping sea levels from rising too rapidly, and scientists are concerned because East Antarctica has long been considered relatively stable. Ahead, the Canadian veterans facing war again to save Ukraine's innocent refugees. Each day the war rages in Ukraine, the road to safety gets tougher for civilians to find. Some families who've been caught in the middle of the fighting are now out of harm's way, in part because of their connection to 2 Canadian veterans. Jeff Semple reports from Lviv.
3 Ukrainian families arrived at this bus stop, bruised, bloodied, and traumatized. Their youngest, this 1-month-old baby, born the same day that Russia invaded. It's terrible, she says. We left everything behind, our city, other family members, our heart. They are the lucky ones, arriving here to the relative safety of Lviv, near the Polish border, after escaping Mariupol. They recorded these images of what's left of their home. My sons are still there, she says. There was nothing left but scorched earth, just hell that burns again and again. Their escape from that living hell was made possible in part by a couple of Canadian veterans.
We're looking at one of the places in here.
Keenan Walper and Dave Lavery served in Afghanistan, and until recently they were working to help their former Afghan interpreters to escape the Taliban-controlled country. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, the veterans turned their gaze to Europe.
And we said we're coming out here right away to see what we can do.
They've set up shop on the Polish side of the Ukrainian border, sending aid in and getting people out.
She lives close to,
including these 2 women who previously worked as interpreters for the Canadian forces in Ukraine. Part of Operation Unifier, launched back in 2015 to train Ukrainian soldiers to defend against a simulated Russian invasion. But they never expected to wake up to the real thing.
I got really scared, like my hands, they were shaking so much.
Her hometown was one of the first in Putin's warpath. With Russian jets flying overhead and bombs falling all around, she knew she had to leave.
The hardest part was to get out of Sumy. It was blocked from different sides. There were Russian tanks and Russian convoys everywhere.
So she reached out to her Canadian military contacts, who put her in touch with Keenan.
And I said, you need to go at the next opportunity.
But her rescue required a logistical feat unlike anything they'd attempted in Afghanistan. She was trapped on the other side of Europe's second largest country.
And you're talking great distances here. We're talking, 800 kilometers each way. And obviously the risk is huge.
Using contacts inside Ukraine, Keenan's team coordinated a cross-country journey that involved vehicles, trains, and multiple bomb shelters along the way, all while avoiding airstrikes, shelling, and fighting. After a several-day trek, she finally arrived in Poland and is now working with the team to rescue more former interpreters and other families still trapped. Dave Lavery says they're just getting started.
We'll do as much as we can, as long as we can. We're here for the long haul.
One of the main differences between their rescues here and in Afghanistan is this. In Ukraine, the men can't leave, required to stay behind and fight. Lavery met this family on the Ukrainian side. The young father said goodbye to his wife and baby, and Lavery promised to look after them.
Somebody's entrusting you with their precious. When you hand somebody your family like that, yeah, it's gut-wrenching.
Even for hardened veterans, the horrors of this war can be too much to take. Jeff Semple, Global News, Lviv.
Backlash and bold accusations. Next, the disputed new book about the Holocaust's most famous victim. Decades after she wrote it, Anne Frank's diary remains a powerful and harrowing account of the horrors of the Holocaust. But a new book about the teen is facing backlash after making a bold claim about who may have betrayed her family. Ross Lord explains.
Anne Frank's first-hand account of hiding out from the Nazi Gestapo, her diary, is universally beloved. It details her harrowing existence along with the everyday concerns of a young teenager before she was captured and died in a concentration camp at the age of 15. This new book is encountering resistance for its explanation of how the Nazis found Anne Frank and her family. It claims the Frank family's hideout, a secret annex in what was her father's office building, was exposed by another Jew, supposedly a notary named Arnold Vandenberg. The allegation followed a 6-year investigation led by a former FBI agent. But Jewish community leaders in Europe and historians say the allegation is flimsy and tarnishes Anne Frank's memory. Jewish leaders in Canada also have concerns.
It's an approach to history that is sort of sensationalized for profit that I think I have trouble with.
In the Netherlands, a report by war historians this week concluded the book did not stand up to professional scrutiny. The book's Dutch publisher has recalled it from bookstores and is urging other publishers to do the same. But in a statement, English-language publisher HarperCollins says it continues to stand by the publication of The Betrayal of Anne Frank, adding the investigation that led to the book was done with the utmost care for an extremely sensitive topic. A statement from the author, Canadian Rosemary Sullivan, says, "Although I was not involved in the research process, I have full confidence in the investigation." Disappointing to Jewish leaders who say guarding against misinformation is more important than ever at a time when anti-Semitic hatred based on lies is increasing.
It's sort of a disregard for historical fact and evidence that I guess they both share, and that is incredibly problematic when we are working so hard to present fact and to preserve the voices of and the evidence, the historical evidence of what really happened.
Canada's largest bookstore, Indigo, declined to comment. Ross Lord, Global News.
And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Jackson Prosco. We leave you tonight with Canada's future LGBTQ2+ national monument to be built in Ottawa by 2025. The design revealed this week is inspired by a thunderhead storm cloud symbolizing strength, activism, and hope. Thanks for watching. Dallas Flexhog will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great weekend.